Did you know there's been 74 plane crashes this week alone between the 12th of December and the 19th of December 2025? Yet 67 of them ended up where no one died. How does that happen? Do you ever wonder why so many aviation accidents end in tragedy, while there's plenty of others that don't? As pilots or aviation crew members, we face constant risks. There's engine failure, there's gear issues, there's electrical failures, hydraulic failures, especially in small operations where there's limited training. Without a deep human factors knowledge, these weak signals that happen to us can turn into disasters really, really quickly. Even high hours pilots still have crashes because of organizational factors, because of poor crew resource management, sneaking in and leaving us vulnerable despite hours and years of experience. This week alone, like I said, 74 plane crashes around the world. Now, 7 of those were fatal, unfortunately. And the most important one that occurred this week was the Cessna 550 with Craig Biffle, the NASCAR driver, and his family on board, which was absolutely a tragedy. There was another Cessna 650 that crashed down in Mexico. Now that had 10 people on board, so an absolutely horrible outcome there. So they're both massive tragedies, and my heart goes out to everyone that's involved in those crashes. But what fascinates me, however, is the fact that there are 67 other accidents that occurred where while some people were injured, the outcome wasn't people dying. Despite failures, the consequences weren't terrible. Now, there's a reason why things go right a lot of the times with aviation incidents. There's human factors and the training that the crews receive that really saves the day on so many occasions. If you're a military aviator or an airline crew member, there is no doubt you have a solid background of human factors, crew resource management, non-technical skills, NTS training. There's no doubt you have that training. But when you notice that a lot of these accidents are actually civilian operators flying light aircraft around, they've generally got 1 or 2 pilots on board, they're just getting hours up, and then bang, they have an engine failure or a landing gear or an electrical failure. And then their world changes really, really quickly. Now, these operators generally receive very little human factors training due to the expense of it, because it can cost some money, and actually in the time that it takes to actually do the training properly. So they just get it from a book, which is okay, but it's not super adequate. But it's pretty common, pretty standard for small, mum, dad, general aviation businesses. Now, when these smaller operators have accidents, however, that end up being successful failures, well, then they're the stories that really pique my interest. My name is David East from the Crew Fusion Academy on School. Please do us a favor, hit the subscribe button for this video, but more importantly, if things like human factors, human performance, safety, and leadership are your bag, what you can do is you can jump across to the Crew Fusion Academy on the School app. I'll put a link in the bio, but that's where we're building community, where a lot of these conversations are taking place. So 74 accidents in a week, 67 non-fatal. Why did 67 have successful failures? Where a failure occurred, but the outcome wasn't a horrible loss. Is it human factors related? Is it a low hours pilot, or is it a pilot that has thousands of hours? Are there human factors considerations from the maintenance side of the world as well? There's always an organizational factor to consider in just about any incident that occurred. Now, this week alone, there were heaps of landing gear accidents. With either the landing gear failed to extend, the landing gear collapsed upon landing, or one wheel wouldn't extend, so they've had to do a belly up landing. These things happen from the maintenance. There's a maintenance failure, there's a technical failure, right? So what is happening in the maintenance of these aircraft that is leading to landing gear failures? Who knows? You're looking at so many organizations. What human factors, considerations are at play in the maintenance workforce that contribute to the gear not working properly? Now, these sort of accidents, they're always very interesting to talk about because when they're airborne and the gear doesn't work, the crew resource management and the thinking that's got to go into actually getting that aircraft back on the ground safely, well, now that's really challenging. And like, of course, it's situational dependent, depending on the aircraft, where you are, all that sort of stuff. But there's plenty of thought that goes into getting that plane on the ground as safely as possible. And it's not just by the pilot and the crew in that aircraft. It's by everyone on the ground. It's by air traffic control, fire services, airfield operators, local police. It's a big effort to help get that plane back on the ground. Sometimes those aircraft are airborne for 3 or 4 hours, getting rid of fuel while the ground gets itself organized to receive that aircraft. There's a lot goes into that. It's really telling, and the human factors that are involved there is that everyone that is involved, not just the pilot sitting in the hot seat. And that's what I find really fascinating. Despite all these accidents, flying is still incredibly safe. And it's not because planes are unbreakable. It's because crews are getting ridiculously good at breaking the error chain, at communicating through problems and making decisions so that mainly they're trying not to die. Now, this is the fascinating part of aviation. I'll give you a couple of examples from this week especially. So a Cessna 150 with 2 people on board, they had engine issues. They had to land off. They had to land in a field. Now, that's a cool story. Actually, you know what? That's actually pretty boring. Yeah, it makes the news, but it's pretty boring. The pilot did exactly what they were trained to do. That's fantastic. Now, of course, there's always more to that story. When you start digging in deep to how the pilot got that aircraft on the ground, the backstory is always quite fascinating. How did they sleep? Were there drugs and alcohol in the system? Were they having an argument with their partner that led to a lack of concentration, and something happened to have that failure airborne, and now they're having to deal with it to get that aircraft back on the ground safely? The backstory is always fascinating. Now, we spend, I don't know about you, but I know I spend heaps of time on YouTube these days discussing and analysing the serious aircraft accidents where people have died, unfortunately. Because those kind of crashes, they're really horrible, but they're really, really interesting as well. There's a lot of lessons that could be learned from them. And there's a lot of great operators out there that put up awesome YouTube videos. They've got awesome channels. And I'm really grateful for them because I learned so much from those guys. Guys like Blank Valerio channel, he's amazing. He's one of my favorite YouTubers. Whenever there's a serious crash, I generally go to him to have a good look at it. Now, you may or may not know this, but if you look through my Crew Fusion channel, I used to do videos like that back in 2017, 2018 timeframe. But I actually started getting sick of it, and that's bad because I could have really monetized my channel quite well because of how popular they are. But it was actually, my mental health was suffering as a result of the amount of time I was spending getting aircraft crashes online, whether it was on my Facebook channel or my YouTube channel. It was a lot of work. I had a young child at the time. It got way too hard. But in my work that I do in the Air Force, I've got Hercules and Caribou time as a flight engineer and a load master. So human factors is a really big thing of my life. In my work, I was finding we weren't spending a lot of time investigating the crashes because, you know what, we didn't actually have many. Thank God, like touch wood, that stays the same. We had to figure out ways to learn from the work that we did. And then I realized actually there is so much to learn here, especially from a crew resource management perspective. There's more lessons that could be learned from work done well, from where something has gone wrong, like you get that engine failure, the gear won't go up or down, get an electrical failure, and the pilot has been able to deal with it, and they deal with it as part of that big system thinking, and the outcome is good, right? It's a successful failure. It's graceful extensibility. That's where there's a lot more learning as far as I'm concerned. It's been super, super successful. So picture this, right? So you're a pilot facing an unexpected engine failure mid-flight. Now, without proper human factors training, there's a really good chance that the outcome of that isn't going to be good. It's very well documented that human factors training is the gap between something being unsuccessful and an outcome being successful. It's the human in the system that really works well. But without that proper human factors training, panic sets in, the errors compound, and of course, disaster looms. Now, with what I'm doing, what I like to do with my Crew Fusion Academy, you find ways to break the error chain. You spot weak signals really early. You coordinate seamlessly with your team and your ground support, whoever needs to be part of that picture. You prioritize tasks under pressure, and generally you land safely every time. The old adage of aviate, navigate, and communicate, super, super effective, but it's this human factors training that allows that aviate, navigate, communicate to work well. Our community transforms that reactive system into proactive leaders. And it's not just aviation. I'm in healthcare, energy, mining, construction, those sort of things. All right, we're able to turn potential tragedies into triumphs. I've had so many people come to me and say, hey, without the training that we did, I don't think we would have had the successful outcome that we did. And gee, that tickles me. I find that absolutely fantastic. Now, members report heightened situational awareness. They report reduced stress in emergencies. And they report safer operations overall. They're basically their flight is a non-event. It is so well managed from start, taxi, takeoff to landing and shutdown that they're a non-event these days in so many cases, which is absolutely, it's just fantastic. And like I said, it's not just in aviation, in high stakes, high reliability organizations, healthcare, energy, construction, the same lessons being learned are saving so many people's lives, bacon, equipment, that kind of thing. Feel free to join us to evolve from surviving these accidents to preventing them, building unbreakable safety cultures through real world stories and expert discussions. Now, there were 2 or 3 other accidents this week alone where there was an electrical failure on board the aircraft. Now, electrical failure on board an aircraft is complex because it's harder to communicate, especially if you lose your radios, your primary radios, but you just end up losing so many of your systems that you really need. You end up having to go to your backup instruments. You normally go to a backup radio. There's always challenges there. The human factors and the crew coordination and the ground coordination that goes into those things is absolutely fantastic. But the electrical failure is a really hard one. There was one on the 16th of December where a pilot flying a little light aircraft, a Velocity XL, he had an electrical failure, had a fire inside the cockpit. Somehow he managed to get it out partially, but it was still sort of smouldering and burning. And as he put the gear down, that was enough airflow, I guess, to actually extinguish that fire. Extremely lucky, because normally airflow fans a fire. He's obviously been able to cool it enough, which is fantastic, right? So this is an electrical fire or a failure. These are normally fatal accidents, especially in light aircraft. The fact that these crews got these things on the ground is an absolutely fantastic win. So well done to those teams. And while I don't know the stories behind them, they also come with, they also come with examples of good communication, good decision making, good task allocation, good task prioritization. You've got to dump the less important tasks and focus on the really important tasks so that you can get that aircraft on the ground safely. Now, sometimes there's extra risk that goes into real operations. So here's a good one. 2 times in 2 days this week. So the US military is currently conducting what's Operation Southern Spear down for Venezuela operations in the Caribbean, right? You've got a JetBlue A320 with a couple of hundred passengers on board out over Caracas in the Caribbean and has an air proximity incident with an Air Force air-to-air refueling tanker at 34,000 feet. Then the very next day, Falcon 900 over Aruba, same again, almost hits a KC-46 tanker. So these tankers are, I'm not sure what they're doing, but they're probably operating on an operational setting that probably has their IFF turned off so that nerds like me aren't tracking them on flight radar, and so the Venezuelans can't actually see what's actually happening there. But that's extremely dangerous because the Caribbean is an extremely busy area for air traffic. Very interesting. The risk of a real accident there with an airliner and a tanker with hundreds of passengers on board the airliner, that's increasing. So hopefully they're doing something about that because the weak signals are already there in the open. There's 2 reports in 2 days. How many other close air prox events have there been? It's definitely time to do something about that. On the 13th of December, there was an interesting one where a United Airlines 777 took off out of Dulles International Airport. Now that's had an engine failure as it took off. that started a ground fire. But that crew once again had to figure out a way to dump some fuel and get that aircraft back on the ground. It had 297 passengers on board. So that's an absolutely fantastic outcome, right, considering. But these days, even when you've got a very large twin-engine wide body, if it loses an engine on takeoff, that's completely fine. It's completely survivable and it's completely manageable. The pilots are well trained for that scenario. In fact, they do single engine cutoffs all the time, especially on takeoff. Generally, all they've got to do once they get airborne and get that aircraft stable, they've got to dump some fuel. And then they've got to get that aircraft back on the ground once it's down to a reasonable landing weight. So with 297 people on board, I'm sure they were biting their fingernails a fair bit on that one. But an absolutely successful outcome, once again, goes back to that awesome human factors training that these guys and girls have. Here's a good one. There was a Piper Archer that took off. It had 4 people on board. They were having engine problems. It didn't have an engine failure. They were just having a fluctuating engine problems just after takeoff. This was near Northumberland in the UK. Now the pilot, he's got thousands and thousands of hours. He's been flying planes for 50 years. He knew exactly what he was doing. As soon as he noticed that he was having engine problems, he just put it down in a precautionary landing on a field somewhere in a farm, right? Absolutely no problem whatsoever. There was zero danger there. He landed it perfectly. Everyone got out and everyone on board was like, hey, that was actually pretty fun. I kind of want to do that again. All right. And of course, there's always a news article that comes out with these sort of things. And this one was in particular really supportive of the pilot, this really old school pilot that had been doing it for years. What an absolute bloody legend. Good on you, mate. That's fantastic. It's these sort of stories that I absolutely really love to hear. I want to hear more about. If you know how to get in touch with some of these people, do me a favor. Like this is reaching, from the bottom of my heart, isn't it? It's a little bit embarrassing. Let me know. I want to run some podcasts with these people and get these stories to you so you can hear what's actually happened, so you can learn from these successful failures. Now, the thing what I'm most curious about with these 67 accidents with 0 fatalities, now how many of them are just dumb luck? How many of them are because of well-trained human factors, crew resource management, and how many of them are just accidents waiting to happen again? I guarantee you there's one thing, if you're trained in human factors, like threat and error management, situational awareness, decision making, how to work as a team, how to deal with stress and fatigue, especially when you're under pressure, actually noticing when something changes around you, those weak signals, those small changes that you think is actually going to become an emergency that you're not really aware of yet, that weak signal, that's an important part of what being trained in human factors is all about. It's really quickly going to be it's going to be something that's going to become really serious for you. Your human factors skills help you take care of that. Yeah, this is where pilots really earn their money. And you know how they get those little golf claps when they land the plane after something's happened? That's where they earn those little golf claps, right? Hey, look, if you're interested in learning more, understanding more, you want to join a community that is like pretty actually insanely obsessed with this sort of stuff, wide eyes there. And not just aviation, but high reliability organizations that I've talked about, healthcare, energy, construction. It doesn't matter where you work. So long as you're human with a heartbeat, there's a good chance there's human factors that are involved in your work. Feel free, come and join the Crew Fusion Academy on School. It's where we talk about this stuff all the time, right? In fact, I generally throw like an operational learning and HOP lens, HOP being human and organizational potential. You throw that lens over these accidents in order to try to understand the pre-accident situation. That's critical, right? The pre-accident situation, where we can in fact have a lot of accidents where this outcome isn't a horrible burning wreck of a plane in the ground. That's what we don't want to see. Now, School, the platform that I'm hosting the Crew Fusion Academy on, it is such a good platform. I'm actually loving it. I've only been on it for a few months. And building a community like this on there it is the perfect system for it. It's still very much in development, and my site is definitely still very much in development, but it needs people like you, because we're finding so many opportunities to learn and improve, and the more people that are in there to actually help the learning and improvement, oh my God, the better it's going to become. Yep, like I said, you can join the Crew Fusion Academy on School. I'll leave a link in the notes. Safe flying, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and as usual, it's been emotional. See ya.